Oh, hey, it's Michael, and I'm going to do a quick series here on how to set up limited media server on a Raspberry Pi 5 so you can have a media server running in your house that's available anywhere. So, the big idea, the Raspberry Pi 5 offers a powerful, energy-efficient solution for a media server and VPN using just 4 watts at idle. So you can enjoy 24/7 secure browsing and media streaming while saving on electricity and reducing environmental impact. So, what does it look like? Well, this image here is what I built, but you don't have to be as fancy. Lights are optional, but it's just this little box with a bunch of wires sticking out of it. And just to show, this thing, ketchup bottles can be larger than the actual device, but it is a very small, easy to fit, just about anywhere device. So how much power does this thing actually use? Well, while idle and including an external drive, it's only about 3 to 4 watts. But then while it's processing, like maybe doing a video job, it can be between 15 and 17 watts. So on average, if you were to leave this thing running, it may be like $5 a year in like power costs, which is not that much. Okay, so I need to do an overview of the storage. So using the new Raspberry Pi 5 with a NVMe hat, we can now have an NVMe drive as our primary drive, which means we can have the power and performance of an NVMe powering our system. It also means we can have expanded sizes. Now, I've tested 1 terabyte and 2 terabyte drives. You can probably get away with a 250 gigabyte drive, but why do that when you can go big? Now, you need to be careful. Not all drives work. And with the case I'm going to suggest, it only works with 2230 and 2242 drives, but I do not know every drive that'll work with it. There was not an extensive list, but I have 2 drives that I've tested that worked. Then also you want an external drive. Now, technically, the external drive is optional, but it's nice to have as much storage as you can because storage fills up fast. So, I would suggest getting at least an 8 terabyte external drive that has its own power supply so it doesn't run off of the Raspberry Pi's power. All right, so let's do an overview of what you're going to need. You're going to need to have a Raspberry Pi 5. You need an SD card for the initial setup. You need to have a Raspberry Pi 5 NVMe hat. You need to have an NVMe drive. You need to have a power supply because it usually doesn't come with one. And you also need to have an external drive and also some sort of network for it to access. Wired or wireless, but wired would be better. So what exactly do you need? You're going to need to have some sort of internet access. You need to have a Raspberry Pi 5. Now, I was just going with the 8 gigabyte, but there's also a 4 gigabyte, but the price difference, I would just go with the 8 because more RAM is always better. Then you also want to have a Raspberry Pi 5 power supply. You want to have an NVMe SSD drive, larger the better. You also want to have an NVMe hat for a Raspberry Pi 5. You also want to have a Raspberry Pi 5 case that'll fit your hat. You also want to have an external hard drive, but it's optional. Also, like I was just to get the SD card, the Noobs version, just because that is just the software's already on the card, a lot simpler to deal with. And then also for the initial setup, you want to have a monitor, a mouse, a keyboard, then also a micro HDMI to HDMI adapter because the Raspberry Pi 5 has weird ports. So the general steps will be purchase a lot of stuff and then assemble it. And then you need to boot from the SD card so you can then set up the initial stuff, like basically updating its firmware, installing the image to the NVMe drive, and then finally booting from the NVMe drive, where then you're going to then do more updates and then actually install the server and then the VPN software so the device can actually do its job. All right, so now I'm actually going to go through my build, and then if you want more information, I will link to the GitHub page, which should have all the links in there to all the items shown. And then also it should have additional instructions because it actually will go through the technical work on how to make everything function. All right, so I'm going to start off doing an overview of all the parts that I'm going to use. Okay, well, I just went with a default Raspberry Pi 5, 8 GB model. You pretty much can only buy it from one source. Okay, so this is the case that I chose, and I chose it for the dumb reason that I can see the fan and the fan had lights on it, because some of the other cases I saw, the board would cover the fan, and I wanted one that would actually show the fan through the side window, just because of reasons. Now this is a 2 terabyte NVMe drive that I have tested. It does work, and I've also used the 1 terabyte version also, but get as much space as you can. Okay, now this part, you could do this yourself, but I just wanted to save time. But this is a version of Noobs. It's pre-installed on an SD card that will work with a Raspberry Pi 5. You could just get an SD card and burn the image on yourself, but you can just pay and it's already done for you. Now this is just a power supply that will work with a Raspberry Pi 5. You can get an official one, you can get an unofficial one. Just make sure it works with a Raspberry Pi 5. And finally, this is the external hard drive that I chose to run with the server. This is a 8 terabyte model, and it has its own power supply, so I don't have to worry about it draining power from the Raspberry Pi. And lastly, you're going to need a keyboard, a mouse, and a screen. And it doesn't have to be the best things, you just need a working keyboard and mouse. And really any screen, like even this screen I have was just a little tiny monitor, just anything will work. And I want to point this out for one last time, but on the Raspberry Pi 5, it has a micro HDMI port, not a HDMI port. So you either need an extension cable that goes micro HDMI to HDMI, or just a little tiny micro HDMI to female HDMI cable, so you can then, get this thing plugged into a screen. So the last part of this video will be me actually assembling the device. I'm going to try to speed up the footage, and then if something weird happens, I'll jump in and explain, because some quirks do occur. Alright, so I'm just going to start the build just by taking everything out of the boxes and just, placing on the table, just getting ready. Now, I do need to mention when working with electronics, you should take care of static. Like I did do this on a static sheet, so it should dissipate any static charges, so just be careful. So my first major step here will be to assemble the fan. And I need to mention I am going to mess this up, so don't follow too closely yet. Right, at this point, I grabbed the wrong screw. Alright, so I got the right screw, but it's not correct yet. It was at this point that I realized that I didn't read the instructions very well, and there's actually supposed to be a spacer between the fan and the plate. All right, so at this point on the board, I need to install these little bits of sticky stuff so that the fan will then spread the heat better. And now I can actually join the fan to the board. So at this point, I'm actually building the bottom baseboard that's going to hold the motherboard. And so there's a series of spacers that need to be installed so it's off the plastic. So everything should just line up, you want to make sure there's nothing like metal on the bottom touching anywhere else on the board, just, where the holes are meant to be. So I'm trying to install the power cord for the fan, and actually there was a little bit of a cover on top, so I had to go pop that cover off, and now I can get the fan cable installed. And here you need to take into account that there's different size spacers. Now it's using the tall spacers for this hat. All right, I'm just going to mention here that I got into a little bit of trouble with the NVMe drive installed here because I didn't realize how to actually install the thing because you need to actually install a screw from the bottom of the plate into a little special tab that will hold it into place. And it took me a really long time to figure that out because I don't do this very often. So I might cut out some stuff here. So let's just see. Also, this is me installing the ribbon cable into the drive. This cable goes from the motherboard into the NVMe hat. So I'm adding these screws right now, but I really shouldn't, and I'm going to go back and fix this, but I need to actually be on the bottom side of it to install the drive. And make sure you get the ribbon cable snugly installed. When you power it on, lights should turn on. So this is where all the trouble's going to start. So I'm going to skip ahead to where I actually figure it out because, yeah, this tab just doesn't want to work from the top for some reason. All right, so here's where I realize that I need to, screw in this thing from the bottom. Maybe that'll work. And then it will hold the drive in securely. All right, so now the board is fully done and attached. It's time to get the case built around it. I'm just going to mention that this part was actually really confusing. Like, I didn't really understand how all the pieces were going to be assembled. Like, I had a basic idea of like this needed to go here, this needed to go here, but I really didn't see where the channels went, like where everything attached to. So this was a mess. Well, I just seem to win in a total 360. I started with nothing, I ended with nothing. All right, and now I seem to actually have a basic grasp of how this case is going to be built. I just got to love a window in a case. All right, so that's the base assembly, but now I need to actually insert the SD card inside of it. Oh, and I can't forget adding the little feet just to make it adorable. And let's do one quick little test. The thing turns on, the light is there, it's spinning, so seems like we're good. All right, so I plugged everything in, keyboard, mouse, and the screen, and then this is what showed up. So it is working. So I'll go over this later, the actual installation process for noobs, and then how to get the initial setup going so you can get the NVMe card burned, and then finally the software install. Thanks!